They said she was too plain, he was too foreign, and another was told to change her very identity just to step into Hollywood's spotlight. But what really happened behind those casting doors? What secrets and struggles shaped the legends we know today? Stay with us, because the wildest moments from Hollywood's golden age weren't always caught on film, and some stories have a twist no one saw coming. 1. Ingrid Bergman's first Hollywood audition humiliation. Ingrid Bergman arrived in Hollywood trailing a whirlwind of European prestige and natural beauty, qualities that, ironically, set her apart in the most uncomfortable way imaginable. Unlike the meticulously crafted starlets that defined the American studio era, Bergman's appeal was refreshingly real. She was the antithesis of the heavily made-up, studio-molded glamour girls, with her tall frame, strong features, and a quiet dignity that radiated off-stage. But when it came time for her first Hollywood audition, these very traits became ammunition for ridicule. The Hollywood she entered was an industry obsessed with conformity. Studios were factories for manufacturing stars who fit a very narrow definition of beauty, voice, and manner. When Bergman walked into her first audition, she was met not with curiosity, but skepticism. The producers and casting directors openly mocked her Swedish accent, seeing it as a flaw rather than an asset. Her height became a spectacle. Instead of handing her lines to read, they had her stand, turn, and repeat simple phrases over and over, each time nitpicking her pronunciation and posture. Executives muttered about her being too tall, too plain, too foreign. Critiques sometimes lobbed at her in front of a room full of other hopefuls, each word chipping away at her confidence. One infamous audition had her repeating the same English sentence nearly an hour, her voice growing hoarse as studio bigwigs laughed and criticized her diction. She was instructed to smile more, forced into wide, artificial grins, and even asked to slouch so she wouldn't dwarf her potential leading men. At one point, an executive suggested she get dental work to Americanize her look, as if straight teeth could somehow erase her European roots. I felt like a circus animal, Bergman later recalled, trying to please an audience that only wanted to see me fail. But the humiliation, rather than breaking her, became a crucible for Bergman's determination. She persisted, refusing to change her accent or bow to pressure to fit a pre-approved mold. Instead, she let her performances speak. Over time, she won over the harshest critics, earning a reputation as one of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses, her individuality becoming her greatest asset. Bergman's audition story isn't just a tale of cruelty, it's a testament to resilience, proof that Hollywood's narrow gates can't keep out real talent forever. Her rise from too plain to screen legend remains one of classic cinema's most satisfying victories. 2. Judy Garland, forced to audition for her own roles. Judy Garland's place in Hollywood's golden pantheon was never guaranteed, even when she was already under contract and beloved by audiences. In the manufactured universe of MGM, not even box office magic could shield a young actress from humiliation at the hands of the very studio that profited from her voice. Garland, born Frances Ethel Gum, was a child prodigy with a voice that could raise goosebumps, yet she was made to feel that stardom was always conditional, that each role had to be earned all over again through rigorous, sometimes demeaning auditions. As a teenager, Garland was repeatedly summoned to audition for roles the studio had all but promised her, especially during the grueling years that led to her breakthrough in The Wizard of Oz. MGM's infamous head, Louis B. Mayer, wielded control over every aspect of Judy's image. If he thought she looked puffy or sounded tired, she was marched into the audition room, lined up alongside a parade of hopefuls, and forced to sing the very songs that had already made her a studio darling. The pressure to be perfect was constant and suffocating. It didn't end with Oz. For later projects, even as Garland's fame grew, she was subjected to impromptu auditions in cold rehearsal rooms, sometimes in front of a panel of indifferent executives who scrutinized her every move and compared her ruthlessly to newer, blonder, slimmer contract girls. They wanted Shirley Temple, Garland would later joke, but taller with my voice. At times, the process grew so demoralizing that she would break down in tears during the tryouts, only to be sent away with advice to lose more weight, adjust her makeup, or change her hairstyle. Perhaps the cruelest twist was that, while other MGM starlets were given glowing press and pampered treatment, Garland's auditions always carried an undertone of suspicion. Was she still marketable, still controllable, still able to withstand the punishing demands of the system? Even after she had proven herself, Garland was never allowed to feel secure in her position. She once described the MGM audition process as being on a treadmill that never stops. You keep running and running, and you're never sure if you're running towards something or away from it. Yet, despite the constant indignity, Garland's sheer resilience and raw talent ultimately won out. Every forced audition, every public comparison, only added to her legend. She became an icon not just because of her voice, but because she survived and triumphed over a system that tried, at every turn, to break her spirit. 3. James Dean's rebel nerves. James Dean is now an eternal symbol of youth, rebellion, and tragic glamour, but his path to stardom was anything but smooth. His audition stories are the stuff of Hollywood legend, soaked in nervous energy, defiance, and a refusal to play by the rules that left powerful men in tailored suits bewildered, even angry. The most notorious of these tales revolves around Dean's tryout for East of Eden, a film that would become his breakout and set the standard for cinematic angst. By the time he arrived in Hollywood, Dean already had a reputation as an oddball, intense, shy, and unpredictable. At his East of Eden audition, director Elia Kazan was searching for something raw, something real. But what he got, at first, was confusion. Dean was jumpy and fidgety, slouching in his chair, refusing to make eye contact. Studio executives whispered that he was either a genius or a basket case. When he finally got up to read for the part, his performance was unconventional. He mumbled, he paused, he shifted his body in ways that seemed almost alien. Someone on the panel even snickered, wondering if this was a prank. During another audition, Dean was so tense that he nearly walked out of the room before his turn, muttering that he didn't need this. He had a habit of ignoring the script, improvising lines, or turning away from the camera in the middle of a scene. It was an approach so alien to the orderly world of studio filmmaking that he nearly lost the role altogether. In another account, a nervous Dean fumbled his lines, staring at the floor, visibly shaking. But something in his vulnerability, the restless energy, and the sense that he might bolt from the room at any moment, caught Kazan's attention. It was authentic. It was exactly what he wanted. Dean's legendary bad audition became the stuff of industry lore. Instead of slick polish, he brought bruised humanity. When Kazan finally cast him, it was a shock to everyone except Dean himself. The performance that emerged on screen was electric and haunting, a direct line to all the awkwardness and insecurity he'd shown in the audition room. Ironically, the very qualities that nearly cost him the part are what made him unforgettable. Dean's story is a reminder that sometimes the craziest auditions, the ones that feel like failures, are actually the birth of something iconic. 4. Vivian Leigh's fight for Gone with the Wind. Vivian Leigh's journey to the role of Scarlett O'Hara is the stuff of classic Hollywood legend, a story that begins with an outsider's gamble and ends with a screen test so magnetic it rewrote the studio playbook. When producer David O. Selznick announced his search for the perfect Scarlett, the role instantly became the most coveted prize in American cinema. Hollywood's biggest names were paraded before the cameras: Katharine Hepburn, Paulette Goddard, Joan Bennett, even Bette Davis. Yet months passed, and the studio was no closer to finding the woman who could embody the fiery, complicated Southern belle. Across the Atlantic, Vivian Leigh watched the frenzy from London. She was British, little known in America, and, by Hollywood standards, an underdog with little chance of ever being considered. But fate has a way of favoring the bold. Leigh, convinced she was destined for Scarlett, made her way to Los Angeles, accompanied by her then-lover, Laurence Olivier. With the help of a savvy agent, Leigh crashed the film's set during the legendary Burning of Atlanta shoot. There, in the glow of firelight and chaos, she was introduced to Selznick as Scarlett herself, her very presence causing a stir among the crew. Her screen test, when it finally came, was unlike any other. Where other actresses delivered rehearsed lines and forced Southern drawls, Leigh was electric. The studio executives, exhausted from months of disappointment, suddenly found themselves leaning forward, mesmerized by her intelligence and barely contained energy. Lee's audition wasn't just acting, it was transformation. She held nothing back, capturing Scarlett's grit, charm, and desperate vulnerability in a way no one else had. Yet the studio wasn't easily convinced. Lee was foreign, her accent a far cry from Southern gentility, and there were those who believed casting a British actress would doom the film with American audiences. But Lee persisted, working tirelessly on her accent and immersing herself in the South's history. Selznick's gamble paid off. The screen test became Hollywood lore, a moment where one woman's audacity changed film history. When Lee was finally announced as Scarlett, there was outrage among some fans, but once the film premiered, no one could imagine anyone else in the role. Vivian Lee's audition for Gone with the Wind is a quintessential Golden Age story, a tale of determination, risk, and the magical alchemy that happens when talent meets opportunity. Her performance not only won her the part, but it also secured her place as an icon of Hollywood's greatest era. 5. Lucille Ball's Oddball audition for I Love Lucy. Before Lucille Ball became the face of one of television's greatest sitcoms, she was fighting for her very survival in the studio system, a B-movie contract player who was often seen as too zany, too unconventional, or simply too out there for mainstream stardom. By the late 1940s, she'd already spent years being passed over for leading roles in major films. When the idea for I Love Lucy was first pitched, executives at CBS couldn't imagine Ball as the star. To them, she was a supporting player, not the woman who could carry a show and revolutionize comedy itself. The problem wasn't just about Lucille's reputation as the queen of the B-movies, but her real-life marriage to Cuban band leader Desi Arnaz. Studio executives doubted whether American audiences would believe a zany redhead and a Latin musician as a married couple. To prove them wrong, Ball and Arnaz took their fate into their own hands. They created a vaudeville-style audition act, a wild, unscripted physical comedy routine that included slapstick, singing, dancing, and plenty of Lucille's signature faces. The network bigwigs sat stone-faced as Ball threw herself into pratfalls, mugged for laughs, and upstaged her own husband with her unpredictable energy. She pulled rubber chickens from a suitcase, accidentally whacked Desi with a prop guitar, and delivered a frantic monologue about a housewife's daily disasters. Desi played the bewildered straight man, trying desperately to keep up. At one point, Ball tripped, recovered, and turned the entire fall into an improvised gag that brought the house down, finally cracking the executive's stoic facade. It was a gamble, one that could have sunk her career if it went wrong. But for Lucille, this audition was her last shot at escaping B-movie oblivion. Her commitment and comedic genius were undeniable. The execs couldn't deny her chemistry with Desi or her command of the stage. When the lights came up, there was no question who should star in I Love Lucy. Ball's performance didn't just win her the part. It convinced a room full of skeptics that television could be a home for innovative, physical comedy and for women who didn't fit the mold. This audition became legend, recounted for decades as the moment when Lucille Ball seized her own destiny, proving that the right performer, given the freedom to be herself, could change the course of television. I Love Lucy went on to become a global phenomenon, and Lucille Ball's name became synonymous with comedic brilliance and fearless originality. 6. Marilyn Monroe's Too Shy beginnings. It's hard to believe that the most iconic blonde bombshell of the Golden Age began her career terrified of the spotlight. But Marilyn Monroe's first auditions were a masterclass in Hollywood awkwardness. In the late 1940s, she was just Norma Jean Baker, a nervous, waifish model with big dreams and little confidence. When she first stepped onto the Fox lot, her beauty was apparent, but her shyness was almost paralyzing. Casting directors described her as hopelessly self-conscious, unable to hold eye contact, voice wavering, hands trembling. During one of her earliest auditions, Monroe could barely deliver her lines. Her famous breathy voice, later her trademark, came not from calculated seduction, but genuine nerves. She would fumble with the script, blush fiercely, and lose her place. Casting agents reportedly dismissed her as too timid, too unsure of herself, and most damningly, lacking the it factor needed to light up the screen. More than once, directors cut her tryouts short, certain that she'd never be able to handle the pressure of a major production. But there was something about her vulnerability that lingered in the minds of a few keen-eyed talent scouts. Monroe's combination of innocence and smoldering beauty was unique, and as she persisted, auditioning for bit parts, commercials, and even as a walk-on extra, she slowly learned how to control her nerves. One memorable story tells of Monroe being so overwhelmed by anxiety during a screen test that she began to cry. Instead of storming out, she apologized and asked for another chance. The director, moved by her humility and honesty, allowed her to try again. This time, she managed to find her voice and captivated the room, if only for a few seconds. Monroe's journey was marked by dozens of rejections, awkward silences, and studio men who saw her only as a pretty face. She took acting classes, watched herself on film, and built her confidence brick by brick. Eventually, the qualities that almost cost her a career, her breathiness, her insecurity, her earnestness, became the very tools that transformed her into a superstar. Her early audition stories aren't just tales of embarrassment, they're reminders of what it means to be vulnerable in an industry that rewards only the bold. Marilyn Monroe's legend wasn't born in a flash of confidence, but in those shaky, tearful, quietly determined moments when everyone else told her she'd never make it. 7. Anthony Perkins freezes on stage. Long before he terrified audiences as Norman Bates in Psycho, Anthony Perkins was an anxious, aspiring actor navigating the high-wire tension of Broadway and Hollywood auditions. Perkins' boyish good looks and gentle demeanor made him a standout, but his nerves were almost legendary among casting directors. In the early 1950s, Perkins found himself at a pivotal audition for a major Broadway revival, a chance to work with influential director Elia Kazan, whose eye for talent had already shaped the careers of James Dean and Marlon Brando. As he took the stage, Perkins could feel the eyes of a dozen industry veterans on him, each waiting to see if he could deliver the vulnerability Kazan was searching for. The pressure was suffocating. He started his monologue, a piece he'd practiced until the words felt like second nature. But halfway through, his mind suddenly went blank. The lines vanished, replaced by overwhelming silence. Perkins stared out over the shadowy theater, mouth open, unable to remember a single word. The audition room, notorious for its chill, felt colder than ever. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. The producers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Some muttered about wasted time. Others simply watched, waiting to see if Perkins would recover. Inside, Anthony was mortified. All his years of training and preparation seemed to unravel in that one moment. He felt the impulse to run, just bolt from the stage and never look back. But instead, he stood frozen, clutching the script, until the casting director quietly excused him from the stage. Most would assume that was the end of his chances. But later, Kazan recalled something unique about Perkins' vulnerability, a kind of raw honesty that most actors worked for years to fake. Perkins' willingness to let his fears show, to be authentically nervous and exposed, lingered in Kazan's mind. Against the odds, Perkins was called back for another audition. This time, still nervous but more resolved, he delivered a performance marked by real emotion and trembling honesty. That second chance led to a breakout role for Perkins, launching him into a career that would later include his iconic performance in Hitchcock's Psycho. His legendary audition freeze became a quiet Hollywood lesson. Sometimes, showing your true self, even in failure, can be the very thing that sets you apart in an industry of masks. 8. Gene Kelly's Studio Obstacle Course. When audiences remember Gene Kelly, they think of dazzling choreography, boundless charisma, and the joyful energy of Singin' in the Rain. But Kelly's first encounters with the Hollywood studio system were far from effortless. Arriving in Los Angeles with big Broadway credits and dreams of film stardom, Kelly quickly discovered that Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer didn't hand out contracts just for talent. They needed to see if he could withstand the grind, the discipline, and, most importantly, the punishing audition process. MGM's casting chiefs devised an obstacle course for Kelly's first screen test. He was led onto a scorching soundstage and told to dance for the cameras, not for a few minutes, but for hours. The rationale? They wanted to see if he could match the stamina of established stars like Fred Astaire, who was famed for dancing through endless takes without complaint. The studio execs didn't just want artistry, they wanted proof of endurance, humility, and pure physical toughness. As the afternoon wore on, Kelly's shirt clung to him with sweat, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Camera operators cycled through reels of film, while a phalanx of casting directors sat with notepads, critiquing every move. More than once, he was interrupted by a director shouting instructions, "Bigger! Faster! Again!" forcing him to repeat complex sequences until his muscles ached and his feet throbbed. Instead of buckling, Kelly thrived on the challenge. He pushed through fatigue, drawing on years of grueling rehearsals and a fierce determination to prove himself. By the time the screen test was over, Kelly was exhausted and drenched, but he had delivered an exuberant, innovative routine that left even the hardened studio bosses impressed. When the executives reviewed the footage, they saw more than just a dancer. They saw a force of nature, a man who could elevate musical numbers and carry a film with his physicality alone. Kelly's studio obstacle course became part of MGM lore, a legendary audition that separated the contenders from the pretenders. It was a defining moment in Golden Age Hollywood, a reminder that before the spotlight, every star had to survive the shadows, sweat, and tests that the system demanded. 9. Rita Hworth, told to change everything. Rita Hworth's journey from chorus girl to Hollywood goddess wasn't just a story of ambition. It was a masterclass in how the studio system could remake an actress from the ground up. When a young Rita, then still Margarita Carmen Cancino, arrived for her first big studio audition in the late 1930s, the message from Columbia Pictures was blunt and unyielding. To succeed, she would have to leave her old self behind entirely. The first audition itself was a test not of acting, but of potential. Studio boss Harry Cohn was infamous for his icy glare and rapid-fire judgments. He watched Rita dance, her specialty at the time, but found her too ethnic for American leading lady standards. In a city obsessed with reinvention, Rita was told, with almost clinical detachment, that her name was too foreign, her hair too dark, and her hairline too low. If she wanted a future in Hollywood, she would need a new identity. The transformation began immediately. Cohn arranged for Rita to see a studio-approved stylist, who began the process of electrolysis to raise her hairline, an agonizing series of treatments that lasted 2 years. Her black hair was dyed a glowing copper red, a color that would become her signature but felt, at first, like a mask. Margarita Cancino became Rita Hworth, and the old name was consigned to studio archives. But the real test came with her first screen test under her new persona. Rita had to prove she could be more than a dancer. She needed to embody the American ideal of allure and sophistication. Cohn sat stone-faced as Rita recited lines, coached to soften her Spanish accent until it vanished almost entirely. Her nervousness was palpable, but determination shone through. She performed dramatic monologues, light comedies, even tearful breakdowns, all while suppressing the mannerisms that had defined her early years in show business. The results, at first, were met with skepticism. Some executives thought she'd never lose her roots, but with each subsequent audition, Rita grew in confidence and versatility. She began to blend the mystery of her past with the glamour the studio demanded, eventually creating an entirely new kind of screen siren. Rita Hworth's metamorphosis is one of the Golden Age's most extreme examples of Hollywood alchemy. Talent, courage, and relentless adaptation in the face of impossible demands. Every time she stepped into the audition room, she had to prove she was no longer Margarita Cancino, but it was the memory of that first bruising audition that drove her to become one of the era's most unforgettable icons. 10. Fred Astaire's studio report card, Can't Act, Can't Sing. Fred Astaire's audition story is perhaps the most legendary and humbling of all Hollywood tales. By the time he reached Hollywood, Astaire was already a Broadway sensation, but the movie world was a different beast entirely. When he tested for RKO Pictures in the early 1930s, the studio executives regarded him as something of curiosity, a wiry, balding man with a gentle stammer whose appeal was difficult to capture on celluloid. The screen test itself was notoriously underwhelming. Astaire danced with his trademark grace, but the camera operators struggled to keep up with his light-footed style, and the sound technicians complained about the tap shoes echoing in the cavernous studio. For the acting portion, Astaire read his lines with a mild, almost apologetic energy, nothing like the boisterous screen personalities that were in vogue. His singing voice, soft and lightly accented, didn't boom or soar the way audiences expected from a leading man. When the audition ended, the RKO Talent Office produced a report card that has since become Hollywood legend. Scribbled on a piece of paper, it read, "Can't act. Slightly bald. Can dance a little." The verdict was damning. The message clear. A Stair was not their idea of a screen star. But fate and a little Hollywood magic intervened. A Stair refused to be discouraged. He kept auditioning, lobbying for any role that would let him bring his unique gifts to the screen. Studio insiders who saw something special in his performance began to champion him quietly. Ginger Rogers, who would become his greatest on-screen partner, later recalled that even the briefest audition with Fred made you believe he could turn the world upside down with a single step. When RKO finally gave A Stair a chance, he shattered every expectation. His dance numbers were not just choreography, they were storytelling, cinematic, and electrifying. A Stair became one of the most influential performers of the 20th century, beloved by generations, and credited with reinventing the movie musical itself. The infamous audition report card remains a monument to Hollywood's short-sightedness, a warning that even the experts can miss genius when it dances right in front of them. For anyone who's ever been doubted, Fred Astaire's story is proof that who can dance a little can change the course of entertainment history. In Hollywood's golden age, every star's spotlight was first won in the shadowy corners of an audition room where nerves, ridicule, and reinvention could crush a dream or spark a legend. For every name in lights, there were moments of doubt, strange demands, and humiliations that almost rewrote history. These stories remind us that behind every iconic performance is a moment when someone nearly gave up, but didn't. So the next time you see a star shine, remember, the real drama often started before the cameras ever rolled.